Welcome to Shepherd's Table. I'm your host, Ian Parkinson, and I have with me today Pastor Shane from St. Peter, Pastor Patrick Schoenberger from Heights Baptist, and Pastor Roland from Victory Lutheran. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
So you picked a topic that's actually been in the back of my mind for many years, and it's dealing with difficult people. And I've noticed over the years that a lot of times the pastor and or his staff are sometimes distracted from their role as a shepherd to dealing with one particular person or persons who are continually in a situation. Do you find that?
I have not had a ton of experience with that myself. I've been at St. Peter for 10 years, and I came into a situation that was fairly settled.
Yeah.
And I don't find anybody there particularly difficult to deal with. I mean, there's moments, but nothing ongoing. Maybe an odd issue that they're got a bit of a problem with, but it's nothing that's not easily resolved.
Okay. What about you, Patrick?
Well, Shane, would you like to switch roles?
I'm very lucky.
Yeah.
Very blessed, I guess. Lucky, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, our church, has I've been there 14 years and served two previous congregations as well, and have experienced a lot of change and turnover and those sorts of things, people coming and going, and of course the whole COVID season, there were a lot of changes there as well. And it's very common that we have people come into our church and it's all about what they want.
Yeah.
And there's the whole story of the man, the boy, and the donkey. I don't know if you know that story, but the moral of the story is if you try and please everyone, you might as well kiss your ass goodbye. And the idea is that someone will come and they'll say, I want this Bible translation. No, I want this one. I want this type of music. No, I want this one. I want, it's all about what I want. I want, eschatological, theological sermons. I want fluffy feel good. It doesn't matter. And I just explain to people, it's not about you. It's not about what you want. And some people can accept that, and other people make it very difficult. They will become divisive. They'll start a church split. They'll make accusations. They'll send nasty letters. So it can be a very difficult and draining situation.
Well, I imagine it takes you away from your normal duties as well, or expectations.
Absolutely. I had to say to one person once, you're the squeakiest wheel in the whole church, because, some people, they can literally take up to half your time. And if we look at Hebrews 13:17, it says, obey your leaders, respect their authority. And then it says something about essentially that, don't make their work a joy and not a sorrow, because that would be of no benefit to you. And the fact is that when you have people that are tearing down the pastor, the leadership, monopolizing all of their time, the pastor doesn't have time for other people. The pastor is emotionally worn out. And all that does is it takes him away from the responsibilities to the rest of the congregation. So when you have people like this attacking leadership, it harms not only the leader, it harms the whole congregation. It's that, when you strike the shepherd, the sheep are scattered.
Right. And I owe you an apology. It's Pastor Roland, not Pastor Grant.
So okay.
Pastor Roland, how do you feel about this topic?
Yeah, well, it's complicated, because all of us, I think, went into this profession because we wanted to serve God and serve people, right? You have to have a certain love for people to do this job. You have to, just as a baseline, right? And I think all of us, in our own way, do love people. We do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. I certainly wouldn't still be here if I didn't love people. But, as I always like to joke, when people ask, well, what's the best part of your job? I say, the people. And then they ask me, well, what's the worst part of your job?
The people.
The people. Yeah. It's the exact same answer, right? And just bouncing off what Patrick is saying, I would say it's like the Pareto principle. 20% of people take 80% of my time.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, there's an extent to which that's just always how it is. Right? And that is difficult, because you are robbing other people of their needed pastoral time, because you've got a couple of people that are just extremely demanding for whatever reason.
Right.
Right. And there might be very valid reasons that they're demanding. Maybe they're going through an extremely hard time and they need a lot of time and investment. Sure, fine. The problem becomes the people that sort of get entitled, and the people that think that, pastor's there for every little whim, every little thing that I need. And the minute that pastor fails to do that, well, you're not a very good pastor, aren't you? You're not very loving, and it gets into that sort of almost, I would say, abusive and manipulative language.
Yeah.
Because they know most pastors are very caring people. And it hurts us to hear those things. I don't want to be told I'm not loving and not caring. I don't want to be told that, oh, you abandoned me in my time of need, right? I don't want to be that. And, there's times where people can legitimately criticize, and there's times where people are just criticizing for the sake of criticizing. They're just very angry, bitter people, and we're the lucky ones that get it taken out on. And the other thing that I would mention is, what a lot of people forget is pastors, whether they intend to be or not, whether they want to be or not, are sort of a physical representation of God, right? You can't scream and yell at God and get a reaction out of him. But you know what you can do? Chew out the pastor. So a lot of times I'll find someone's really mad at God, but they'll take it out on me because they can't punch God. They can't scream and get a response, because what they really want is a response.
Yeah.
Right? They want the,
validation.
Exactly. They want that back. And so, the other thing that I think we should talk about in this conversation is what the word pastor means. Shepherd. Well, shepherding is not always easy. There's sheep that are very easy to tend and they listen and they follow. And then there's sheep where you got to put a lot of effort into keeping them in the flock and to taking care of them. And so I think that's built in. But in terms of my own seminary education, I feel like I was totally unprepared for people management and conflict management. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that was a huge lack in my seminary training. And I actually wish somebody would have said, hey, you need to be prepared for this. Because I knew there was hard things. I knew there was stuff, you'd have to deal with complicated stuff. And sometimes people get argumentative. But the amount of time I spend just people managing and conflict resolution managing and anxiety management, my.
I can remember now, probably 40 years ago, talking with a United minister up north, and he had a very similar issue, that he'd come out of seminary ready to bring the word to the people, and he wound up being a counselor with no training. Mm-hmm. I don't know, do the seminaries these days now provide maybe some kind of counseling training so they're at least somewhat prepared?
They do. The issue, though, is Roland's definition of a pastor, or at least the equivalent word being shepherd, is pretty key. But it still doesn't explain what a pastor is supposed to be doing.
Right.
Because we've said before, and I will continue to say it, we are not therapists. Any counseling that we do is always on a spiritual level, or it should be. The minute we start diving into psychiatry, psychology, therapy, that kind of stuff, we really shouldn't be delving into that, because we're not trained for it, for one, and it's not really it's not part of our job, right?
Right.
It's not that we don't want to help people, but we're not equipped to do it that way, and there are people that are far better trained to do that.
Well, and I'm sure you're very cautious that you don't want to make the issue worse.
Well, that's right. And in fact, many times when I talk to people, I really don't say all that much. Just for that reason, and for others too, because when they're talking to me about a certain thing and maybe it's something that they can resolve, I try as much as possible to get them to resolve it themselves. Just by maybe occasionally throwing in a well-constructed question to lead them to ask of themselves, okay, what's at stake here? Like, why is this particular problem, ruining your whole life, or just ruining this part of your life? And what would be a possible solution to that? Have you thought of this? Or have you thought of that? Or something like that, right? But beyond that, and I think that's one of the issues too, is in fact people outside of the church will come to us for counseling because we're free.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thinking that we can do the same thing as a psychologist.
Do you find the same thing, Patrick?
Well, I wanted actually to pick up on the point about Bible schools and seminaries preparing people to be pastors. You know, when Jesus went out and called disciples, he called on them to count the cost. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Take up your cross and follow me. If you want to save your life, you're going to lose it. If you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. You will be persecuted. You know, there's this cost of following Christ. And I think where Bible schools and seminaries have failed is that they haven't prepared students, prepared pastors to count the cost of being in the ministry. And nobody in seminary told me that as a pastor, I would be yelled at, screamed at, called names, threatened, ignored, hated, and slandered. And this is only what the church people do to you. We're not even talking about what people outside the church might do. And I think that this has been an incredible disservice to people in ministry that they haven't informed them about counting the cost. And we see this in the statistics. You know, most people who start out in life as young men, presumably as pastors, do not retire as pastors. Many pastors only last a few years. The attrition rate, the turnover is terrible. We've got a massive shortage of clergy right now. And a lot of this because people are not being properly prepared, or they're facing really extreme abuse. And I think, you know, we all know about abusive pastors, and we hear the news stories. You know, whether it's a high profile pastor, maybe it's Bill Hybels or Bruxy Cavey, or, you know, some of these big name pastors. They're accused of abuse. They're accused of sexual abuse. You know, whatever. And so we all know about abusive pastors. But he'll tell you what the dirty secret of the church is. The abuse of pastors. And that is something that's swept under the carpet. And a lot of great books out there. One I would highly recommend is called Pastor Abusers. There's Clergy Killers. There's another set of 3 called When Sheep Attack, Recovering from a Sheep Attack, and one more on the sheep attack venue. But it's something that really that is not talked about. And the Apostle Paul warned, you know, the Ephesian elders in Acts chapter 20. He said, after I leave, men from among your own numbers and others will come in to the flock to gather a following unto themselves, and they will teach false doctrine, and they will divide. And this is what I find for a lot of people. You know, I know, you know, if the day comes and I retire from being a pastor, I'll look forward to a quiet life maybe. But you know, a lot of people want a following. And they come into a church and they're new and they say, you know what, I want to lead a Bible study. And when somebody comes in new and they say they want to lead a Bible study, I mean, there's alarm bells going off because they want a following. And so it starts out with they want their home group, their Bible study promoted in the church. And it's only a matter of time before it turns into a church split, because they want to be the pastor. So they start to sort of shepherd this group of people who come to their home. And, you know, then of course they begin planting seeds of doubt against the church leadership, and on I go, and then it turns into a church split. But it's so true. And we see this, you know, the Apostle Paul warning the Ephesian elders there in Acts chapter 20, and it's happening all the times in churches today. And when people are like that, I mean, I say, why don't you go start your own church? There's some people out there, they want to be the pastor. And instead of going out and reaching the lost and starting their own church, which they're free to do, they find it easier or preferential to come into a pre-existing church and divide it and build their flock that way.
Sounds very liberal to me.
Well, and it's evil. And there's a spiritual thing. I mean, of course, we see a lot of this in the Bible, the sheep among the goats, or the wheat among the tares, that Satan comes in and plants weeds among the wheat. And at the end of the age, you know, the angels will come and gather up the weeds and tear them out, and they will be burned in the fire. And the whole idea that it's not just about people with different opinions, although that can be an issue, but I think there's a spiritual element too here, where Satan wants to plant divisive and destructive people in congregations for the specific purpose of hindering God's work.
Right. Pastor Roland, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is such a complicated subject, but just bouncing off what Patrick said, that idea that it's easier to take over an institution or exploit or corrupt something that already exists than to build a new one, right? I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. It's easier to go into a company that's already built than to start your own, right? This is just the reality. And I think that's where predatory people are always going to target things that are already healthy and existing and want to work their way into that. You know, the other question about what a pastor is, I think, is an important one, because the pastor is expected to be all things to all people, in a manner of speaking, but we can't be.
Yeah.
You know, Paul talks about being all things to all people, but really I've come to the conclusion that the only person that can really do that is Jesus Christ.
Yeah, because we are infallible.
Well, exactly. Like there are some things I'm good at, and there are many things I am not good at. And I can't be all things to all people. I can't serve all the people's needs, right? In a church, there is unlimited need and limited resources, which is ironically the same fundamental problem in economics, right? The problem of scarcity, right? How do you take limited resources and maximize their usage, right? And there's all sorts of economic schools of thoughts about that. But there's, in a sense, the same thing in the church. A pastor has to decide every day, what am I going to do? And that should be done prayerfully and through the power of the Holy Spirit, of course. But there's a list that's always longer than we'll ever get to. And we have to make choices. I guess I'm not going to see this person today who I know needs to be seen, but I simply don't have the time, the energy, or I'm not in the right mental space to do it, for example, right? Now, just going back to that, so then the pastor has to decide, you know, what am I going to do or not do? And that's complicated, and it's painful, mind you, because you feel like you've failed people.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes back to the topic of difficult people and difficult congregants, what I find so interesting in the church is the pastor is always expected to be merciful, gracious, and forgiving. But when the pastor needs mercy, grace, and forgiveness, you won't find any.
Yeah.
You'll find about zero, right? I'm supposed to forgive people for the most heinous things imaginable done to others or done to me. But I slip up once, oh, game over. You know, and I'm thinking of a personal case where, you know, I've worked with someone for a long time. We had a tumultuous relationship in terms of they were constantly, you know, causing problems. And I forgave, and we worked through it, and forgave and worked through it. And the minute I slipped up,
Boom.
boom. Now they're gone. They won't speak to me. I'm a horrible monster, right? And so that and that's where it gets complicated. So the question then becomes, who's responsible for defending the pastors? Because a lot of times it's actually very hard to defend ourselves.
Yes.
It's very hard to defend ourselves. So I actually think, and this goes back to, I think, the role of councils, elders, deacons, whatever you call it in the church, I actually think it's very important for those people to be vigilant about problem makers in the congregation and say, hey, you know what, you can't abuse our pastor. You can't speak that way. And if you continue to do that, we're going to have an issue, right? Because, and that's difficult, right? I understand that's complicated, but a pastor can't always protect himself against everything. And I do think it's incumbent on the congregation. Of course, legitimate criticism needs to have an avenue. It's not a dictatorship. Ministry is not a dictatorship, or at least it shouldn't be. And there should be legitimate avenues where you can complain and bring up legitimate grievances and or observations or whatever. But a lot of the sort of real abusive people, they need to be stopped not just by the pastor, but they need to be, in a sense, stopped by the congregation as well, saying, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to talk to our pastor that way.
Do you each have I use the term council or consistory?
A consistory?
Well, or a church council.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all do. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it occurs to me that, I mean, they were probably the ones that were heavily involved in the process to hire you in the beginning. And then to it, like Roland said, they should be a significant part of that. Whoa, let's just sit down here. We need to discuss this situation.
They should, if they're aware of it, and if they're not part of the problem already. Because some councils can be.
Yeah.
If there's any, well, there's plenty of issues in the church. One of them is, because they're still run by people, There's often power struggles between council and administration, between council and pastor, even between council members themselves and the chair. All kinds of things that can go on. And again, I haven't experienced a lot of these things on that scale myself. I've got a very decent council and stuff like that. But there is still conflict occasionally, and you can see that kind of rise up. And there is a kind of a power balance that has to be maintained. And how that's done, it just depends on the temperament of the people involved, and especially the pastor, because they're kind of looked on as that CEO figure, right? Yeah.
When technically they're not, are they, Patrick? The pastor is an employee of the congregation, supervised by council.
Well, yes, I say that, it really depends on a lot of times on the culture of the church. In some churches, the pastor is viewed as the hired hand, and in other churches, he's the CEO. So, and that will depend on tradition, denomination, culture, churches that are more urban or more rural, so I think pastors play different roles. But, we've got a church board in our church, and, thankfully a very supportive group of people, and they have done their part in terms of trying to protect me. I know there were some people in our church in the past that, for probably a period of 2 years, seemed to have all these complaints about me, and they would complain to me, and they would complain to board members, and finally, we got together with them, myself and the board members and this couple, and I just looked them straight in the eye and I said, "Do you have any specific allegations of wrongdoing or false teaching against me?"
Yes.
And the woman said, "No, we just don't like your style." And what do you do with that? I mean, and this had monopolized my time and the board members' time for really up to 2 years, because somebody doesn't like my style. Everybody has a different style. Shane has a style. Roland has a style. Everybody's got a different style. And this is just it. Pastors are no different from anyone else. When we sin, we need to be confronted. We need to repent. We need to be held accountable. It's not that the pastor is above anyone else. Absolutely not. But you can't destroy a pastor simply because you don't like his style.
Yes. Because
that's not a matter of truth. That's not a matter of morality and right and wrong. It's a matter of preference. And the problem is a lot of churches are driven by preferences. They're insider-focused clubs. We're here to keep our members happy rather than being a purpose-driven church. We're here to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I know, we had a workshop in our church a number of years ago. I wasn't there. I was away on holidays. But a number of people participated in this workshop. And the facilitator was asking questions determining, are you a preference-driven church or a purpose-driven church? And the conclusion that they actually came to was that at the time our church was preference-driven, responding to the needs or the complaints of the church members, the congregation. And so we have tried to become very intentional since then. We're not here to cater to people's preferences. We're here to serve the purposes of God. And as soon as you do that, my philosophy of ministry, I tell people, is based on Galatians 1:10. If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ.
Yeah.
And so, it's one way or the other. And if you want to be a people pleaser, you're going to fail to please God because you can't serve two masters.
All right. Pastor Roland.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would just mention in this conversation is churches have to be willing to let people walk.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, and you
sometimes help them walk.
Well, yeah, and sometimes say, don't let the door hit you on the way out, right? Yeah. Because there's certain things that it gets to a point where it's like, look, you're never going to be happy here. Sorry, there are people that will come in and they want to change absolutely everything. To which I say, thanks, but this clearly isn't the place for you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. We're not going to change all of our music, our entire structure of our service, the times of the service, what we wear on Sunday, how we conduct ourselves, how we we're going to change everything so that you like what it is now. It's like, maybe this isn't the church for you. Mm-hmm. Right? And at some point you have to just say, Godspeed.
Yeah.
Godspead. And you can't be afraid. And that's hard, though, because I understand this, because a lot of churches aren't exactly doing great. And every person, in a sense, is a loss. right? And especially like if you've got a congregation of like some of these rural churches or whatever, you got 30 people, one person or two people is devastating.
Yeah.
That's like a massive amount of people basically leaving. But ironically, what I've found is if you allow people to leave or you invite them to leave, it ends up just strengthening what's already there. Yep. Because then you don't have the person complaining about every little thing on Sunday.
It's pruning.
It is. And, you know, what I find so ironic is a lot of the complaints come from, and a lot of the stuff comes from entitlement. People will often appeal to, well, I've been here for 30 years. Or I've volunteered for this ministry for 10 years. Or I've given $100,000 to the church over the last 50 years. Therefore, I'm a stakeholder, essentially is how they then view themselves,
yeah.
and I should determine the future, right? And ironically, a lot of people root their complaints in stuff like that. Is they'll say, well, because I've done such and such, you must, not you should, you must do such and such, right? And if there's one thing I know, and just going back to what Patrick said about pastors burning out, I have never met a pastor that burnt out because they got tired of preaching on Sundays.
Yeah.
I have never met a pastor that burnt out because they had to go visit someone at the hospital. You know what burns pastor? You want to destroy your pastor, you want to kill his ministry, you want to kill your church. Find petty reasons to constantly be taking up his time, complain about everything, never say thank you for anything, and rile other people up to complain too.
Yeah.
And I promise you, you'll drive your pastor out.
So, I'll ask each of you individually. How do you prepare yourself to start your day, Shane?
To start just a regular day at the church?
Yeah.
Well, first I get out of bed.
Well, probably that might be difficult some days, I imagine.
Yeah. Though I go through several disciplines in the morning because it helps prepare me physically and mentally and of course spiritually.
Yeah.
So I go to the gym for a while in the morning. I go to the church. I do about a half-hour devotional. Go through my emails and just kind of wait for people to start coming in. Of course, the secretary shows up about 8:30, 9 o'clock, something like that. We chat about what's happening and that sort of thing. But I feel pretty grounded by the time I have to deal with anybody.
Do you have a process where at the end of the day you somehow step away from your collar?
I wouldn't call it a process because, and I think these guys will agree with me, there really isn't an end to the day until you're in bed.
Okay.
Because by the time, it's not that you're bothered every night, but there will be a phone call at night or an email or something you got to deal with or a text message after hours, right?
Yeah.
It's not an 8 to 5 in that,
Yes.
in that typical sense, right? And so the collar really doesn't come off until my head hits the pillow. And I'm not complaining about that. That's what we signed up for,
Yeah.
right? It's just the reality of the situation. And I quite enjoy it, actually.
Yeah. Thank you to all three of you gentlemen for coming in and discussing this, I'm sure, difficult issue of dealing with difficult people. So good luck.
Oh,
Stay-
thank you so much.
Go in peace.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching Shepherd's Table.